My name is Sergeant Thomas Beck, ID 442-768, Technical Logistics, 7th Mobile Infantry Division, Camp Helton, Eastern Syria. I'm not a hero. I'm not a rebel. I just did one thing right. I filled out an inventory report, like I did every month. And that very report dragged me into a nightmare. June 2023. Camp Helton was in the middle of a redistribution phase, equipment being reassigned to forward outposts. I was ordered to audit the final batch before the next resupply wave. I started checking serial numbers, long-range radios, chest-mounted GPS devices, military-grade batteries, smoke grenades. But the more I cross-checked, the more things didn't add up. Missing. A lot. Specifically, 17 military GPS tracking units, 6 encrypted communication devices, 9 crates of 5.56mm rounds, and 1 mid-range jamming module. I thought maybe it was a mistake, a data entry error perhaps. But when I checked the internal transport logs, I found that these items were never returned to the depot. I brought this to Warrant Officer David Kessler, my direct CO, a man known for being cold-blooded, but by the book. I remember that day clearly. His office was dead silent. He was scribbling something and didn't look up. I handed him the report, with the transport logs attached. When he read the last page, his mouth paused. His eyes slowly lifted to mine. "Are you sure about these numbers?" I nodded. I double-checked. He went quiet for a few seconds, then leaned back, folded his arms. His gaze wasn't one of oversight anymore. It was a warning. "Beck, you're a thorough guy. I respect that. But don't make a mountain out of a molehill. You catch my drift?" I swallowed hard. "Sir, these are military-grade items. If I don't report this..." He cut me off. "You're really going to throw away your whole career over a few pieces of hardware?" That wasn't a warning. It was an unspoken order, disguised in a cold, dismissive smile. I walked out of that office with a copy of the report in my pocket, heart pounding. That night, I sent the report to the Central Military Inspectorate using a secure account, encrypted. I didn't trust command, but I trusted the system, or at least I thought I did. 48 hours later, I was summoned, and from that moment on, everything began to fall apart. 3 days after I submitted the report to the Central Military Inspectorate, I was urgently summoned to the battalion-level personnel office. On the table was a thick file, already printed. The first item read, "Reclassification and discharge due to ethical concerns and failure to cooperate." I looked at the officer sitting across from me, Captain Morales, the same man who once shook my hand when I received the Golden Desert Campaign Medal a year ago. Today, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He simply said, "Orders from Regional Command. We have no authority to intervene." I snatched the file, flipping through the pages. No hearing, no request for explanation, no opportunity to defend myself. Just a final decision. Discharged with neutral status, ineligible for veteran benefits. I asked, "Why? Because I did the right thing?" Morales sighed. "You dug too deep, Beck. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to be unearthed if everyone's doing fine while it stays buried." The day I walked out the gates of the base, no one saluted. No one shook my hand. Only the loudspeakers echoed a welcome for a group of senior officers visiting for inspection. And me? The man who once wore a name tag on his chest was now just a redacted line in a military file. I came home empty-handed. I called the Judge Advocate General's office, no answer. Emailed the veteran human rights representative, bounced back with the reply, "File does not meet verification criteria." That's when I began to understand. It wasn't that they didn't believe me. They did. And that's exactly why. They had to silence me. But I didn't stay silent. I retrieved a copy of the inventory report, backed up a security camera video I had discreetly copied weeks earlier, footage of a transport truck moving the missing equipment out of the base at midnight, without any official orders. I opened a new hard drive, encrypted everything, and named the folder. I'm not crazy, I just know too much. That was the moment I decided. If the system chose to exile me from a uniform of honor, then I would drag them out of the shadows they hide in. I had lost everything, but not my memory, and not my belief that somewhere out there were still people who chose to stand on the side of what's right. I began digging through the list of those who had worked with me in the supply unit, people who were directly involved in transport, handovers, or might have seen what actually happened. One name stood out: Corporal Carl Jenkins, the one who drove the shipment truck that week. I called him, voice trembling. "Carl." "It's Beck. Do you remember the shipment mid-June?" Silence. Then a gravelly voice replied, "I thought they'd already shut you up." Carl didn't say much, but agreed to meet that evening, at an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. We sat in his car, the distant street light casting a faint glow. Carl lit a cigarette, took a drag, then said, "That delivery didn't come through me. An officer handed me a sealed envelope directly. No barcode, no manifest. They told me, 'This is classified freight. Just drive. No questions.' I asked, 'Did you record anything?' Carl nodded. 'I have a personal dash cam. Still got the footage, nobody knows.' That was the first puzzle piece. And soon, more began to surface. A military nurse told me she once saw a group of soldiers loading containers onto a truck at midnight, with no scheduled medical transfer. A server tech quietly tipped me off that there was a login from Kessler's account at 2 a.m., during hours when no one had clearance. I compiled all of it: Carl's dashcam video, the inventory report, warehouse logs, witness statements. I sent everything to Lieutenant Amanda Ross, a military legal officer I'd worked with during a humanitarian operation in Iraq, someone I knew still held a shred of belief in justice within the military. She called back 2 days later, her voice tense. "Beck, do you realize this isn't just a theft case? You've stumbled onto an illicit military equipment network, one that involves multiple officers, including some no longer in service." I didn't respond, not because I was shocked, but because I already knew. In war, the enemy doesn't always wear a different uniform. Amanda continued, "I'm filing with the Federal Military Justice Department. But Beck, they're not going to sit quietly. You need to be ready." I smiled faintly. I've already been stripped of my uniform, erased from the system, branded morally unfit. Ready? Amanda, I've never been clearer in my life. That night, I recorded a short video, not for posting, but just in case I disappeared. In it, I said, "My name is Thomas Beck. If you're watching this, it means I touched the hornet's nest. But the truth, once lit, cannot be extinguished." 3 weeks after Lieutenant Amanda Ross officially filed the complaint, the Western Regional Military Court opened its preliminary hearing. My name, Thomas Beck, reappeared on the military command board, but not on any duty roster. It was now part of an active investigation file. I was summoned as the key witness in the case. Abuse of authority, unauthorized distribution of military equipment, and profiteering from internal supply chains. The courtroom sat within a high-security military facility. Cold gray walls, the national flag draped behind the judge's bench. I wore a suit, not a uniform. But that day, I held my head higher than any officer in the room. Warrant Officer David Kessler, the same man who coldly told me, "Don't dig too deep," now sat across from me, flanked by a team of high-ranking military lawyers. As the testimony began, Amanda Ross presented the chain of evidence. A copy of the original missing inventory report, I submitted dash-cam footage from Carl Jenkins, confirming the truck left base without clearance. System logs showing Kessler's unauthorized access. 3 anonymous witness statements, all consistent in timing and method of the equipment's disappearance. Each piece of evidence landed like a blade, cutting through the polished armor Kessler had built over the years. His legal team fired back. This is a smear campaign against a decorated officer with over 20 years of service. Mr. Beck, an individual discharged for moral misconduct, should not be deemed a reliable witness. I stood up, looked them in the eye, and said, I wasn't discharged for a lack of ethics. I was discharged because I refused to abandon mine. And if you think a voice recording, a video, 3 statements, and server logs are all part of a conspiracy, then perhaps you're not afraid of lies. You're afraid of the truth. The courtroom fell completely silent. Moments later, the military judge turned to Kessler. Warrant Officer Kessler, do you acknowledge authorizing the unauthorized transport on the night of June 16th? Kessler hesitated. His lawyer whispered a warning, but he looked at me, no longer with that cold detachment, but with bitterness, resignation, and a silent confession in his eyes. 2 hours later, the hearing was adjourned, and the story broke. Military Insider ran the headline. Warrant Officer, accused of illicit military distribution. Discharged whistleblower, breaks the silence. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. I used to think you were crazy, Beck, but today, I realized you were the only one who couldn't be bought. I didn't feel proud. I just felt lighter. Lighter than the day I first took off my uniform. Because this time, I knew. I stood for what was right, even when right had no army behind it. 4 days after the preliminary hearing, the Federal Military Justice Department expanded the investigation. I was summoned to Washington, D.C., this time not just as a witness, but as the whistleblower who triggered what could become the largest military logistics scandal in 2 decades. Lieutenant Amanda Ross and a joint investigative task force traced back 5 years' worth of logistics contracts, starting from the moment Kessler assumed command. One name kept reappearing in tactical equipment maintenance contracts, Atlas Logistics, a private firm run by former Colonel Ray Carver. Carver had served as a senior logistics commander before retiring early in 2018, just before the first vanished shipment dropped off the official records. In a classified meeting, Amanda revealed a summary report. 24 equipment shipments with unverified destinations, 17 inventory reports wiped from the system, 6 officers directly involved in coordination orders, 2 of whom had conveniently taken early retirement, and nearly $12 million funneled into a shell corporation based in the Caribbean. A wave of search warrants followed. Atlas Logistics' office was sealed. Carver was detained at a golf course, where he was consulting on defense strategy for private clients. Simultaneously, 3 senior officers were arrested for evidence destruction and falsifying military records. The news exploded. CNN, Reuters, and even Al Jazeera ran headlines. U.S. military logistics compromised. Discharged sergeant emerges as whistleblower against Shadow Network. My name, Thomas Beck, appeared on national television, not for medals, but because I refused to stay silent when silence was expected. But it came at a cost. My phone was tapped. Someone broke into my home, took nothing, but left traces. An anonymous email was sent to my girlfriend. He'll take the whole family down with him if he doesn't stop. I didn't respond. Instead, I uploaded all data to a publicly accessible encrypted platform, shared it with 3 independent media agencies. Then I returned to the very room where my military ID was once revoked, not to reclaim honor, but to prove that truth, once exposed, can never be smothered again. They can block my path. They can try to silence me. but they cannot stop the landslide they buried for years. February 2025, nearly 1 year after I filed my first report, the federal military court officially delivered its verdict. Warrant Officer David Kessler, 14 years in prison for abuse of power, evidence suppression, and involvement in military equipment trafficking. Colonel Ray Carver, retired, 18 years in prison for operating a profiteering network within the supply chain. 4 other officers, sentenced to 5 to 10 years, depending on their level of involvement. Atlas Logistics, permanently banned from all military contracts. As for me, Thomas Beck, my honor was formally reinstated. All records of wrongful discharge were erased. I regained my veteran benefits and was invited to return to the Army as a special advisor for transparency and whistleblower affairs. I declined. I had already folded up the uniform, not because I hated the military, but because I understood the dark side that uniform once helped conceal. I chose to write. I gave talks at military academies. I founded a nonprofit called The Red Line, dedicated to supporting veterans who were forced out for daring to speak the truth. But some wounds don't heal. I have PTSD. I wake up in the middle of the night, not from battlefield flashbacks, but from the sound of an office door slamming shut behind me the day I was dismissed, from the eyes that turned away, from the loneliness of standing alone in the heart of a power storm. A journalist once asked me, "Do you regret blowing the whistle?" I replied, "Yes." There are nights I wish I had never seen that inventory file, but if I hadn't acted, my conscience would weigh heavier than all the losses I've suffered. They gave me a medal, the Medal of Integrity, an unprecedented honor. I accepted it, not to glorify myself, but to remind them. The cost of truth isn't always death. Sometimes it's isolation, abandonment, and the silence of those who once called you brother. I live quietly now. No headlines, no spotlight. Sometimes someone recognizes me, reaches out to shake my hand. They call me the man who wouldn't stay silent. But I don't need a title. All I need is to know they didn't bury the truth with me. And if one day someone else is backed into a corner for daring to speak up, they'll know they're not alone.